Today you become an 18th century Italian castrato. When I was 7, my father took me to a doctor in town, and on the walk home my life turned onto a completely different curve. My name is Luca. I was born in a small wheat-growing village in the Tuscan countryside, a household of 5 living off a few rented sloped acres and one thin donkey. My father Matteo bent his back in those fields his whole life. He told me, "Luca, you have to be the one who walks our family out of this wheat and never looks back." My mother Chiara, when she was young, used to sing the chants in our village church. She held me on her knees and taught me to read syllables, and that was the earliest melody I knew. When I was 5, my mother coughed through an entire winter. The next spring she was gone. Before she went, she pulled me close and asked me to finish singing that in book for her. After my mother died, the old village priest said my voice was clean. He told my father to take me into town and let an outside visitor try me out. When I was 7, my father took me to that doctor's house in town. He told me he was going there to take care of one thing that would keep me from going hungry later in life. What that doctor did with his blade that day, I have never let myself think back on. When I woke, my father sat beside the bed in silence, only spooning wheat porridge into my mouth. I lay in that bed for an entire month, and no one in the village came to visit. Neighbors would lower their heads and walk away when they saw my father, since everyone in that village knew exactly what had happened. In the second month, the outside visitor came to our home to look at me. He was a recruiter from the Bologna conservatory, and he had me hum a passage of my mother's hymn. He listened, then nodded and told my father this child is worth 50 silver coins. My father's hand trembled once, and he slowly set down the cloth bag of wheat seed he had been holding. The day I left with the recruiter, my father walked me all the way to the village edge. He did not shed a single tear. He only tucked my mother's worn old hymn book into my bundle. The carriage took 3 full days to reach Bologna. Tall buildings ran together in long blocks. The city bells rang every quarter hour, and I had never seen so much stone in my life. The conservatory was tucked inside an old converted monastery in the south of the city. 30-some boys like me lived there, ranging from 7 years old all the way up to 14. My teacher's name was Bernardo. He was 50, and in his younger years he had been a singer in the Sistine Chapel in Rome. After hearing me sing one passage, he placed me in the advanced class. For the first 3 years the breath training nearly made me retch. Up at 5 every morning, 2 laps around the cloister, then an hour of sustained tones in front of a tall mirror. The conservatory rules were strict. Meat was weighed in grams, no laughter was allowed after meals, and our teacher said this voice of yours is something you have to pay back with interest. The classmate I was closest to was a boy from Naples named Johnny. His high notes were brighter than mine, but his breath was never quite as steady. When I was 12, the conservatory took us to sing Vespers at the great church of San Petronio. It was my first time standing under those stained glass windows, and my legs trembled so hard I could not even count the beat. After we sang, the maestro held me back. He said this voice is something the conservatory cannot give a future to. Your next stop has to be either Rome or Vienna. At 14, I took my first outside job, a small church in Venice celebrating the Feast of the Assumption. They were paying a full 6 gold coins for the night. That evening the church was packed wall to wall. When I climbed to the highest note in the scripture, the silk-gowned noblewoman in the front pew lowered the painted fan in her hand. After the service, the parish priest pressed those 6 gold coins into my palm. He smiled and said, "Come back next time, child, and we will charge our church only half price." On the road back to Bologna, I rolled those 6 gold coins between my fingers the entire way. That was the moment I finally understood how many silver coins my mother's old book was really worth. When I was 22, I received an invitation from the papal court in Rome. The Easter Mass at the Sistine Chapel needed a high voice, and my old teacher had recommended me for it. The ceiling of the Sistine Chapel was painted by Michelangelo. The moment my voice opened, I felt as if even the saints up on that vault were leaning down to listen to me alone. That year I became the highest paid soprano voice in the city of Rome. The papal court put me on a steady salary, and noble salons took turns inviting me to their dinners. At 24, I traveled abroad for the first time, to open a new season at the Imperial Opera House in Vienna. I was playing the part of a prince sent into exile. Viennese audiences are not usually loud, but that night they applauded for a full quarter of an hour. The Empress sent her footman down the aisle to hand a bouquet up onto the stage. At 26, I went to London and performed an entire season at the Haymarket Theatre. The English printed engravings of my profile in pamphlets and kept them as souvenirs. Over those years, I saved a real sum of money. I bought a small townhouse in Bologna and paid to have my father's village roof retiled, and his letter back was only ever one short line. When I was 30, an English countess in London asked me not to leave. Her name was Amelia, 3 years older than me, and her husband was away from home most of the year. We stayed at her country estate for 2 full months. She read Shakespeare to me. I sang Monteverdi for her, and neither of us ever spoke about the future. One night she asked if I could go away with her into the Scottish countryside and live quietly. I did not answer, because that contract written on my body was something we both already understood. The papal court has its rules. A singer of my kind is not permitted to marry. A few years before, an older colleague had quietly tried and was banned from performing for a full 5 years. One dawn, I quietly climbed onto the mail coach to Dover, leaving no letter behind, because I was afraid that if I started writing one more line, I would not be able to put down the pen. When I came back to Rome at 32, the papal officials politely asked me to make duplicate copies of my last season's contract. Some of the bigger venues no longer wanted me on their stage. At 34, I started to feel the high notes were no longer as easy as before. My old teacher had warned me long ago that once a certain age comes, this voice has to be paid back. I quietly asked an older physician in Vienna to look at my throat. He said the wear had already begun, that I had at most another 7 or 8 years, and from now on I had to use it sparingly. At 37, the London theaters turned to new productions. My name was no longer on the playbills, and my agent wrote saying take a season off, and we will see. At 40, I held a farewell recital in Rome. There were still people who came forward with bouquets, but I could hear it myself. The tail of every note had already gone hollow. In the winter of my 43rd year, after one cold reception in Vienna, I suddenly lost my voice. For 3 full months, I could not finish a single line of even the simplest hymn. The invitations from the noble salons grew thinner one by one. The London pamphlets stopped printing my portrait. I closed my door in Bologna and stopped going out. At 45, I called in the Vienna agent who had managed my money to settle the books. He failed to appear for 3 full days, and only then did I understand my savings had been swallowed. At 47, I sold off half the furniture in my Bologna townhouse and moved to Naples, into a single rented room down a narrow old alley in the southern part of the city. On the streets of Naples, some still recognized me, others did not. Each week, I sang vespers for free at a small chapel down by the harbor, helping out an aging parish priest. From 50 onward, I took on 3 students from the alley around me. Their families were poor too, but I only taught them to read music and never let them go down the road I had walked. When I was 55, my father fell gravely ill. I traveled through the night back to Tuscany. He gripped my hand and never said a single word of apology, and I never asked him for one. At 60, I sat on my small balcony in Naples. With one breath of sea wind, I finally understood that what the doctor's blade had taken from me all those years ago was far more than just one cut. And that was the life of an 18th century Italian castrato. If you have ever walked a road of no return because of someone else's choice, leave a comment below. For the next episode, vote A, an Edo Yoshiwara courtesan, or B, a Republic-era Shanghai cabaret singer. This is fictional dramatization for entertainment only, not based on any real person or event.